The rain fell hard on the small town of Cedar Creek that Tuesday evening. Sarah Martinez pressed her face against the cold window of the old diner, watching water stream down the glass like tears. She had been running for 3 days now, and her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. Her bruised ribs ached with every breath. The purple marks on her arms told a story she wished she could erase. Marcus would find her soon. He always did. No matter how far she ran, how carefully she hid, he somehow tracked her down. This time felt different, though. This time, she had taken his money. All of it. The cash he kept hidden in the coffee can behind the tool shed. Sarah touched her swollen lip gently. The cut had stopped bleeding hours ago, but it still stung. She pulled her worn jacket tighter around her thin frame. The diner was warm, but she couldn't stop shivering. Fear had a way of chilling a person from the inside out. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. She spun around quickly, ready to bolt through the back door if needed. But instead of Marcus's angry face, she saw a tall man in a cowboy hat shaking rainwater from his dark coat. He was probably in his early 30s with kind brown eyes and weathered hands that spoke of honest work. His boots clicked against the checkered floor as he walked to the counter. The waitress, Betty, smiled at him like an old friend. "Evening, Jake," Betty called out. "Coffee." "Please, ma'am." Black as midnight. His voice was deep and gentle, with a slight Texas drawl that made Sarah think of safety somehow. Jake Turner had been driving back from the cattle auction when the storm hit. His ranch was still 20 miles down the highway, but the rain was coming down so hard he could barely see the road. The diner's neon sign had been a welcome sight through his windshield. He settled onto a stool at the counter and noticed the young woman by the window. She looked scared, like a deer caught in headlights. Her dark hair was damp from the rain, and she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting trouble to walk through it. Betty poured his coffee and leaned closer. "She's been sitting there for 2 hours," she whispered. "Ordered 1 cup of coffee and made it last. Looks like she's been through something awful." Jake turned slightly to get a better look without being obvious. The woman was pretty, probably mid-20s, but there was something broken about the way she held herself. Her jacket was too big, like she had grabbed whatever she could find in a hurry. "She pay for the coffee?" Jake asked quietly. "Barely. Counted out change like every penny mattered." Jake nodded and pulled a 20 from his wallet. "Next time she orders something, this covers it. Don't tell her it came from me." Betty smiled and pocketed the money. "You're a good man, Jake Turner." Outside, the storm was getting worse. Thunder rolled across the sky like God was moving furniture. Sarah jumped every time lightning flashed. She couldn't stay here much longer. Betty would want to close soon. And then where would she go? She had $43 left from what she'd taken. Not enough for a motel room, especially not in a storm like this. Maybe she could sleep in the bus station bathroom until morning. It wouldn't be the first time. Sarah was so lost in her worried thoughts that she didn't notice the man in the cowboy hat had moved to the booth behind her until he spoke. "Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to intrude, but you look like you could use some help." Sarah's body tensed immediately. She turned around slowly, ready to run. Men who offered help usually wanted something in return. Something she wasn't willing to give. But Jake's eyes were different. There was no hunger in them, no calculation, just genuine concern. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure you are," Jake replied, keeping his voice soft and non-threatening. "But this storm's not letting up anytime soon. Roads are probably flooded by now." As if to prove his point, the lights in the diner flickered as thunder crashed overhead. "I've got a ranch about 20 miles from here," Jake continued. "There's a guest cabin that's been empty for months. You're welcome to wait out the storm there. No strings attached." Sarah stared at him like he had spoken a foreign language. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Jake thought about how to answer that. The truth was he'd seen that look before. His sister had worn it for months after her ex-husband had put her in the hospital. The way this woman flinched when he'd first spoken, the careful way she held herself. It all told a story he recognized. Sometimes people need help, he said simply, and sometimes good folks are in the right place to give it. The sincerity in his voice nearly broke something inside Sarah. When was the last time someone had offered her kindness without wanting something back? She couldn't remember, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to walk away, to keep running. Nice words and gentle voices could hide dangerous intentions. I appreciate the offer, Sarah said, standing up slowly, but I should get going. She moved toward the door, but Jake's voice stopped her. At least let me drive you wherever you're headed. These roads aren't safe in weather like this. Sarah's hand was on the door handle when the lights went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in an eerie yellow glow. Well, looks like nobody's going anywhere for a while, Betty called out from behind the counter. Storm knocked out the power lines. Could be hours before it comes back. Sarah sank back into her booth, feeling trapped. Through the window, she could see that the parking lot was already flooding. Water rushed down the street, like a river. Jake watched her carefully. The fear in her eyes had multiplied when the lights went out. Whatever she was running from, darkness made it worse. The offer still stands, he said quietly. My truck's got 4-wheel drive and good tires. Once this rain lets up a bit, I can get us out of here safely. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. She was exhausted, hungry, and scared. The money in her pocket wouldn't last much longer. And somewhere out there, Marcus was looking for her. But this cowboy could be just as dangerous, maybe worse. At least she knew what Marcus was capable of. The rain pounded against the windows like it was trying to break in. Sarah realized she was shaking again. Why? She asked suddenly. Why would a stranger want to help me? Jake considered the question seriously. He could have given her a dozen good reasons, but he settled on the truth. Because you look like someone who's been hurt enough. And because I've got a sister who once sat in a diner just like this one, too scared to trust and too tired to keep running. Something in Sarah's chest loosened just a little. What happened to your sister? She's safe now. Took some time, and she had to let people help her. But she's got a good life now. Married to a decent man. 2 kids who think she hung the moon. Sarah wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that safety was possible, that there were still good people in the world. But believing had gotten her hurt before. The storm raged on outside, and Sarah realized she might not have a choice. The water was rising, and even if the rain stopped now, the roads would be impassable for hours. She looked at Jake again, really looked at him. His hands were folded on the table, non-threatening. He hadn't moved closer or tried to corner her. When she'd gotten up to leave, he hadn't tried to stop her physically. If I say yes, she said slowly, and I change my mind later, will you bring me back to town? Absolutely, Jake said without hesitation. No questions asked. Sarah took a shaky breath. Maybe it was the exhaustion talking, or maybe it was the storm making her feel like she had no other choice. But for the first time in months, she decided to take a chance on trusting someone. Okay, she whispered, but just until the storm passes. Jake nodded and finished his coffee. Just until the storm passes. Neither of them knew that this decision would change both their lives forever. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the old world and preparing the ground for something new to grow. As they waited for the storm to ease enough to travel, Sarah found herself stealing glances at this cowboy who had offered her shelter without asking for anything in return. She couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her like she was worth saving. And Jake, watching her relax just slightly as the minutes passed, wondered what kind of monster had put that fear in her eyes. But he also wondered if maybe, just maybe, he might be able to help her find her way back to feeling safe again. The storm was far from over, but somehow sitting in that little diner with emergency lights casting everything in golden shadows, the future didn't seem quite so dark. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle by the time Jake's truck pulled into the long driveway of the Double T Ranch. Sarah pressed her face to the passenger window, trying to see through the darkness. Lightning still flickered in the distance, but the worst of the storm had passed. The ranch house was bigger than she had expected, with a wraparound porch and warm light glowing in several windows. Off to the left, she could make out a smaller building that must be the guest cabin Jake had mentioned. "That's it there," Jake said, pointing toward the cabin. "It's got everything you need. Kitchen, bathroom, clean sheets on the bed. I keep it ready for when my sister visits with the kids." Sarah nodded, but didn't speak. The closer they had gotten to the ranch, the more nervous she had become. What if this was a mistake? What if Jake wasn't the gentleman he seemed to be? Jake parked the truck and turned off the engine. "I'm going to grab some supplies from the main house. Food, towels, that sort of thing. Why don't you wait here while I turn on the lights and get the heater going?" He was giving her an out, Sarah realized. A chance to change her mind and ask him to drive her back to town. The kindness of it almost made her cry. "Okay," she managed to say. Jake smiled and got out of the truck. Sarah watched him jog through the light rain to the cabin. A few minutes later, warm light spilled from the windows, and she saw smoke beginning to curl from the small chimney. When Jake came back, he was carrying a paper bag and what looked like some folded blankets. "All set," he said, opening her door. "It's nice and warm now." The cabin was even cozier than it had looked from outside. There was a small living room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen with everything she might need, and through an open door she could see a bedroom with a quilt-covered bed. "The bathroom's through there," Jake said, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. "I brought some food, sandwiches, soup, coffee. There's more in the main house if you need anything." Sarah stood in the middle of the room, feeling overwhelmed. It was so clean, so peaceful, so different from the cramped, dirty places she had been staying. "I can't pay you for this," she said quietly. "I'm not asking you to." "But why? I mean, really, why? People don't just help strangers for nothing." Jake leaned against the kitchen counter and studied her face. She was still pale, still jumpy, but some of the terror had left her eyes during the drive. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "When's the last time you felt safe?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She thought about it seriously, trying to remember. "I don't know," she admitted. "A long time." Jake nodded. "Everyone deserves to feel safe, even if it's just for one night." Sarah felt tears threatening again. She turned away, pretending to look at the books on the small shelf by the fireplace. "I should probably tell you," she said without looking at him. "I'm in some trouble. If someone comes looking for me—" "They won't find you here," Jake said firmly. "And if they do, they'll have to go through me first." The certainty in his voice made Sarah turn around. Jake looked completely serious, like he meant every word. "You don't even know what kind of trouble," she said. "Doesn't matter. Everyone deserves a chance to start over." Sarah sank down onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going for days was finally wearing off. "I took some money," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "from someone who hurt me. He's going to be looking for it." Jake moved to the chair across from her, careful to keep some distance between them. "How much money?" $5,000. It was his drug money. Money he made selling pills to kids. Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "And this